Welcome to the BC Society of Transition Houses video to support peace counselors in their work. The purpose of this video is to provide guidance on working with children and youth and their caregivers who've experienced violence, and also to give some suggestions on how to structure sessions. This video is not prescriptive. It's not meant to be a do it exactly like this. We understand every peace counselor has strengths, abilities, preferences, and we honor that. If you'd like more support or ideas for anything you've heard in this video, please check out the Peace Toolkit with ideas from counselors around the province. The Peace program is an 8 to 12-week psychoeducational program for children and youth who've experienced violence and abuse and their caregivers, and we work with children between the ages of 3 and 18. The program doesn't delve deeply into the history or the past of the families that we serve. Rather, we focus on support and safety in the current lives of the families we work with. You will hear in this video me refer to mothers to describe caregivers, because primarily in our program, that's who we work with. But the contract language for the Peace program actually says non-offending parent or caregiver. So that means that peace counselors will also work with fathers, grandparents, foster and step parents. I'd like to say a few things about framing the work that we do in the Peace program. Violence and abuse are attacks on an individual's dignity. So as being part of a positive social response for children, youth, and caregivers who've experienced violence, it's part of our job to uphold the dignity of that person. Everything I do, everything I say, and every way that I interact with this individual, I have as a guiding question, how is what I'm doing upholding their dignity? I think of this as dignity-driven practice. It's really important to think about how you view children and youth. In our field and in domestic violence research, young people have often been framed as sort of helpless, hapless witnesses to violence. And anyone who's worked with them knows this is not true. Children and youth are incredibly adaptive, creative, responsive, and I want to honor their brilliance, their ingenuity, and their creativity every chance I get. I want to ask children, and don't be afraid to ask them, what did you do when that was happening? How did you stay safe? How did you know how to do that? The answers draw out how they've responded, shows their agency, shows their creativity. Everyone resists violence in some way. And when I say resistance, I don't mean necessarily fighting back. By thinking of hope, by knowing something can get better, by even leaving our bodies in a moment of overwhelming violence, these are acts of resistance. And conversations about resistance and responses to violence are not upsetting, traumatizing conversations. They're conversations that uplift and empower because they point out the strength. They point out what people did in that moment. And they're really important conversations to have with children and youth. The Peace program works with children and youth between the ages of 3 and 18, which is an incredible developmental span. And while much of the work will be the same across those ages and stages of development, it's important to think about special considerations for certain ages and stages of development. For example, young children. When working with younger children, it's really important to involve the caregiver. I would never do safety planning with a child who was 3 or 4 on their own. In fact, you could consider the relationship between the young person and the caregiver as the client, because violence and abuse also attacks that relationship. So strengthening and building that connection is really important work with young children. Young children aren't literate, so using text-based sources is not going to be very useful. They want to play. Puppets can be an incredible tool to use because young children can suspend disbelief in the most magical way, and it's often so much easier to speak through and with a puppet, for example. I focus on safety with young children. I want to talk about what you did in that moment. How did you stay safe? What do you do when mom or dad gets angry? Or how do you know they're getting angry? I want to draw on their knowledge, their capacity, follow their lead, and work with the caregiver to increase the safety of this child. When working with school-age children, literacy becomes a tool you can use in your sessions with them. They also become much clearer in expressing their wants, their desires, their agency. So you can expand what you do with them. Games. I would still use puppets. The internet becomes a tool that you can use with school-age children for safety planning and to find out more about their world. When youth reach out for support, it's really important to respond as quickly as possible. Sometimes that window of interest to talk to someone is small and short. You need to be flexible with youth, respond to their needs. The internet can really be a great resource when working with youth. I'm an adult, so there's a ton about their world that I don't know about, and they can teach me about their social media, about videos, music. There may be some websites that I can introduce them to, and we can talk about safety or use the internet as a resource for safety. Establishing trust and safety with youth can take a little more time, depending on their prior experiences with adults. So be patient, trust their lead, and never make a promise that you can't keep. Participation in the PEACE program is a voluntary decision or choice. Resistant client is a sort of term we'll hear in our field, or resistant participant, and I think it's a very interesting phrase. I think it says more about the person using the phrase than it does about describing the child or youth. If someone was forcing me to come to counseling or insisting that I go talk to someone about something difficult in my life, I think I would be resistant. I understand that. I see it as a strength, as a boundary setting, as agency. So I don't pathologize the idea that a child or youth is not trusting me or doesn't want to come. I get it, and I support that response. So when I meet the parent, the non-offending caregiver of a child or youth, and they let me know they really want their child to come to counseling, but their kid doesn't want to, there's a few things I want to do and talk about. I first want to acknowledge that I get their worry and their stress and their desire for their child to get help. So first I want to align with the parent around that desire and not alienate them. But I also want to help them understand their child response as seeing it as a strength, as reframing it not as something terrible or defiant, but as that child expressing their choice, and it needs to be honored. I'll remind them that the PEACE program doesn't work with youth and kids who don't want to be here. I also want to reframe resistance as something negative and help that caregiver see the positives and the strengths and the autonomy and the voice that the child is using, and to honor it. I might suggest that they ask their child, would they be willing to just come once, and then they can decide on their own. And that way, it is an honoring of the child's agency, but it's also maybe suggesting they step forward a little bit, and then I get to meet them once. I get a shot at it, at trying to connect with them. That approach supports the autonomy and the voice of their child, while also encouraging them to step forward and try something new. That conversation with a caregiver is a wonderful opportunity to remind them of the importance they are in their child's life, and that no amount of counseling could match their relationship or the support that they can provide. Before meeting with a child or a youth, I really want to meet with a caregiver. You've heard the phrase context is everything, and I think in our field this is really true. The more I understand about the context of the family situation, the better support I can be to this young person. So what has happened? Was there a recent incident of violence? Is safety a concern right now? What barriers does the family face? Have they recently arrived in Canada? What kinds of responses have they had from other social responders, like the Ministry of Children and Family Development or the police? Is racism an issue? Poverty? All these things will set a context for my work with this child or youth. When I meet with a parent or the non-offending caregiver, I want to make sure a few things happen in that session. I want to go over the consent to service with them. I want to make sure they understand confidentiality and the limits to it. I want to find out what are their concerns and their worries and their goals and hopes for their child, and make sure that it can align with such a short-term program. We only have 8 to 12 weeks. And so I want to make sure that we're sort of on the same page in terms of what the program can provide and what their expectations are. I want to talk about how we can support them while I'm supporting their child. Maybe it's weekly phone calls. Maybe it's a session partway through. I want them to know that I'm aligned with them and that we can work together to provide support to their child. Children and youth can feel a variety of things before meeting with us. Imagine coming to see someone to talk about something hard in your family. That can be very anxiety producing. So my focus is to make this easy. The first few sessions really set the foundation, so don't rush this part of the work. It's really important. It's all about safety and relationship building. Everything I do is towards the purpose of building relationship with that child. I'd like to focus on playing a game, a get-to-know-you game, to sort of ease the tension of asking a lot of serious questions. I sometimes use something called the sponge game, which the details are outlined in the toolkit. But, basically kids get to throw a wet sponge at the wall as part of the get-to-know-you game. So it makes it a lot easier because we're playing right away. I often have the first session be a little bit shorter. And my focus is that this child is leaving our interaction feeling great relief, that this went way better than they thought, that they're a little bit excited to return, and that they know what to expect from what we'll be doing together. Safety and relationship building is the focus on these first sessions. So I am paying attention to body language, to eye contact. I'm responsive to their needs. I want them to understand confidentiality and the limits to it. And the process of building relationship and safety can look different for every single person. And I need to be responsive to this and follow their lead. Structure and predictability are key elements in creating safety with children and youth. Once they know what will happen when they have a session with me, they can start to relax if they can predict what's going to happen. It's less important what we decide to do at the beginning of a session, that we co-create it. I've used everything with children from lighting a candle to feeling charades. Again, it doesn't really matter what it is you do, but that it's collaborative, co-creative, and that they have a say in what's going to happen when they come and see you. One really easy way to start a session with a child is to just have a check-in, to pick a feeling that they have, and for both of you to share that feeling. It's a really easy way to demonstrate that there are no negative feelings and that all feelings are welcome in this room. I also like to think of what I'm doing with a person that I'm working with at first as building agreements. And this can be very explicit. We can use the flip chart with a child who's literate and talk about all the things that they want to talk about. We can make a list of topics that they find interesting. And I can also add my topics. I can say, hey, my job here is to talk about safety a bit, so I'd like to put that on our list as well. And that way we can build excitement and collaborate together over how this will go. It's also a great tool to use to talk about their strengths, to honor and acknowledge all the things that they will be willing to talk about. And to make safety explicit, it's okay to put on that list that Tracy won't ask any questions about blank if they don't want to talk about that, because that's their right. And that's part of dignity, as I mentioned, is maximizing freedom and choice. And setting agreements with a child is a great way to start. So as you continue to meet with a child and youth, now that you've started to establish a foundation of safety and trust, you're kind of into the bulk of the work. If a child is not safe at home, or there's limited safety in that child's world, it might be difficult for them to engage with you, and that's okay. It may be that the whole time what you're working with that child on is building a relationship, and that's a lot. That's actually quite deep work when they maybe haven't been able to build a relationship with any adult before. So don't judge that or think that you're not doing the work. That will be the work. If there's safety, if you start to see that a child is relaxed and trusting you, then it will just fly. Children will take charge. You will notice if that room and that space is there with that child or not. So the goals and the agreement that you have set at the beginning will structure what happens in those sessions. And there's really no end to what you can use to work with a child. Lego, games, role-playing. If I notice hesitancy in a child with their body, I pay close attention and I will verbalize. I'll say, hey, I'm noticing you're showing me with your body that you're really not interested in doing this. Thank you. Thank you for expressing that boundary. It's also okay to tell me, Tracy, I don't want to do that here in our time. So I encourage them to express themselves, their wants and needs and desires, and things that they don't want to do. I'm very fortunate where I work in that we have a big art cupboard, which we explore with kids so they know what's in there. And that can be mask making, that can be using paint, clay, anything that a child is drawn towards. It's a lot of fun, and we want it to be fun. We know what's happened in their lives is serious, but there's always room for fun and play and connection and enjoyment. In fact, that is the work. I can't talk about working with children and youth without talking about food. It's such an important and easy way to make a connection. The first time I meet the caregiver, I make sure to ask not only about allergies, but what are favorite snacks that your child has. And I'll have that ready on the first time I meet the child. The snack will be there. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money, but it's a really important, welcoming way to meet a child for the first time. Closing your weekly session with the child or youth you're working with is as important as opening. Having that predictability and structure that they know how you will end together is really vital to creating and building safety. It matters less, again, how you close it, but that you do, because kids that have experienced violence and abuse, it's really normal for them to have trouble with transitions, because transitions have often been fast and sudden. So you want to prepare them for ending. I will often be explicit and ask a child, like, how many times do you need a reminder that we'll be ending? And then I will do that. I'll say, hey, we got 30 minutes left, not to interrupt the play, or 15 or 10, and then come up with something that you do together. I've used everything from blowing out a candle to putting the feelings we talked about in a box and closing it till the next time. Maybe a box we've decorated and they know where it sits in the room. As long as you close respectfully, kids can move on and be ready with the next thing in their life. Ending your work with a child or youth is a really valuable experience. It's an opportunity to have a closing in a way a child may not have had before. Lots of times in the lives of children who experience violence and abuse, endings can be abrupt and sudden. People leave, there's divorce, radical changes, pets disappear. So working up to the idea that you're closing and reminding them and preparing for it in a celebratory, kind of a graduation style way can be really, really healing and wonderful. Is there special food we could have? It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. Your program doesn't have to be super flush, but just that it's special and planned. And what do they want to do? Do they have a favorite thing we did that they'd like to do again? Not every agency has a policy on gift giving, but it's good to check if yours does. It doesn't have to be a big gift. This is more of a memento of the time shared and the relationship that you've created. So it can be a stone with a strength written on it. It can be one of those wordles you create online with a bunch of adjectives describing them that you make into a certificate. It could be a special journal that you write in, a wish for them going forward. The idea is to honor their work. And you may need to explain why we do have to close, but also that they did amazing and that we did amazing things together. And that as long as I'm at this agency, I can be here to come back and say hi to. If you want to come and see me for a visit, to have a cup of tea and share a time, just tell your mom and we can do that. Those of you who work with children and youth know they're not sometimes great at expressing gratitude, and it can feel a little bit invisible what we do. I want you to know, and the BCSTH wants you to know, that we see you. We know that you're doing powerful work in connecting with families that have experienced violence and abuse, creating safety, providing dignity. These are not small things. Building relationships with these people that you work for and with is powerful and valuable. For more information and resources, please go to the BCSTH website at bcsth.ca. They have incredible publications, training, YouTube videos, or email them at info@bcsth.ca. On behalf of the BCSTH, I'd like to personally thank you for spending time with this video, and I do hope that it's been helpful and supportive in your work with children and youth who've experienced violence. Thank you.